So our moderator for this evening is Aaron Hwang, a third-generation Chinese-American author. He holds an MFA in fiction from the Iowa Writers' Workshop, a BA in English from Yale University, and is the author of 3 books with, is it Hachette? Hachette? Hachette, okay. Okay, I'm embarrassed. Hachette Book Group, and he lives newly in Rockville, Maryland, so welcome to the area. We're really pleased to meet you. Tricia Elam Walker is an award-winning author, educator, and recovered lawyer, our favorite type. Her novel, I shouldn't say that, there's probably plenty of lawyers. Her novel, Breathing Room, was published by Simon & Schuster and Pocket Books. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Baltimore Sun, Essence, and other publications. She has provided commentary for NPR, CNN, the BBC, and more. Tricia's short stories are included in the O. Henry Prize Stories, News Stories from the South, and other anthologies, and her essays are published in Father Songs, Dream Me Home Safely, It's All About Love, and more. Several of her plays have been produced, and her first children's book, Nana Akura Goes to School, was published by Random House in June 2020. It won a 2021 Children's Africana Book Award and the 2021 Ezra Jack Keats Writer Award. Her second picture book, Dream Street, was published in November 2021 and garnered 5-star reviews and was a New York Times Best Children's Book of 2021 selection. Tricia is an associate professor of creative writing at Howard University right here in Washington, D.C. Alonzo Vereen is a graduate of Morehouse College and the Iowa Writers' Workshop. He's worked as an editorial assistant at Crown Publishing Group, where he served in the editorial teams for some person named Barack Obama, and Springsteen's Renegades, Matthew McConaughey's Greenlights, Seth Rogen's Yearbook. I'm not sure I feel about Seth Rogen and Barack Obama on the same list, but otherwise I can keep going. Nothing gets Seth. And Jimmy Chin's There and Back. He has contributed to the Atlantic Monthly and is the author of Historically Black American Icons Who Attended HBCUs. Afabwaje Kurian received her MFA from the Iowa Writers' Workshop. Her short fiction has appeared in McSweeney's Quarterly Concerned, Callaloo, Crazyhorse, The Bear Life Review, and Joyland Magazine. She has taught creative writing at the University of Iowa for the International Writing Program and for the Writers' Center. Born in Jos, Nigeria, and raised in Prince George's County, Maryland, and in Ohio, Afabwaje now divides her time between Washington, D.C. and the Midwest. Afabwaje, if you want to come up, and I will hand over the mic to you for a reading. Everyone, please welcome Afabwaje to this.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Can you hear me? Yes. It's so good to see old faces, familiar faces, and also new faces. Old as in, like, you know, former. People have known familiar faces. So thank you to the Writers Center for hosting us tonight. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel, not only to be with Alonzo and Aaron, who are also Iowa Writers Workshop alum, but also to sit on the panel with Tricia Elam Walker, because when I first started trying to get back into writing, I've written since I was 7 years old from a young age. But I was working for the government in a building not too far from here, and I wanted to get back into writing and re-engage, and the first class I took was actually with the Writers Center here, with Tricia Elam Walker. And when I left her class, she pulled me aside and she said, "You should be a writer, you should be writing." And as if I didn't get the message, she sent me an email again saying, "You should be a writer." And I think that was really affirming, and I think that it shows and kind of highlights just the value of spaces like this, and the fact that we have just really talented instructors who are here to encourage you and shepherd you through learning the skills and the craft of writing. So I will be reading from my debut novel, which came out September 24th, so 1 month exactly today. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share it with you. I'll be reading from chapter 9, but before I read, I just want to kind of give you a background on what it's about. So I like to say that my novel is in conversation with Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart meets the Poisonwood Bible. So how many people are familiar with the Poisonwood Bible? Oh, good. I always ask this, and someone told me I was an elderly millennial, and they've never heard of it. But I think they're in conversation, and my novel interweaves the perspectives of the American missionaries and also the Nigerian townspeople. So the novel is about a town in central Nigeria that is grappling with the presence of American missionaries. And so in chapter 9, what we have is Zanya. We are hearing the story from his perspective. And Zanya is a laborer and translator for the mission station. and Reverend Jim is in charge of the mission station. And so we're at the bar with the laborers who are coming back from a long day of work building the church. And something else you must know is that earlier in the novel, Zanya was allegedly set on fire in his village and miraculously survived without a blemish. And this is a rumor that's been going around town. The night was warm and the mosquitoes unobtrusive. Their presence announced only when they pricked the bare legs and arms of a patron at Shigudu's beer parlor. Around Zanya, customers buried their heads in steaming bowls of pepper soup, and Zanya caught a glimpse of their faces when they needed to wash down the ganda or cool their tongues with a swig of beer. Zanya and his laborers did not eat, though they occupied 2 of the 7 tables and congregated under the light bulbs hung across the bar's tin roof. Victor Uwaifo's voice came from a radio somewhere above their heads, singing in tune with the twang of his guitar. 2 women arched their backs as they pounded yam, their chests heaving with each rise of their arms, pounding in tune with the song, while Shigudu's son grilled moist flanks of grass cutter, fanning smoke that blew in his direction. The laborers had come to Shigudu since their first building project, and though the laborers felt the tightness of their pockets now, they came for the atmosphere and the ritualistic aspect. Zanya drank his coke and he listened as his laborers argued about the Igbo returnees coming back to reclaim their houses and businesses in Robata and attempting to re-enter their roles in universities and the military. It was too early to know how they would reintegrate into Robata and other cities and towns in Nigeria. The war had bred animosity and distrust. Biafrans made a good attempt at this war. They should be treated with respect when they return, Kago said. War is war, but their efforts should be rewarded. Who said we would not respect them, Itabwi said, as if he were the head of a university determining which person to employ. Kago's not saying we won't, Zanya said. 3 years was long for those soldiers to fight, for them to have resisted federal troops. Chubbs will tell you. One of the laborers said, Ojukwu was lying to this country, tricking all of us. He was collecting his weapons for war while people were laughing at him. Like the Reverend, Itabwi said. The men laughed, and one agreed, yes, like Reverend Jim. A laborer said, you go compare Reverend Jim with Ojukwu, liars, the both of them. Itabwi looked around at the other men and licked his lips, gearing up for a rant. Reverend get money, and him no one pay us. Monkey they work, baboon they chop, one of the men called. The others laughed, and a couple of them said it was true. Zanya felt his laborers' silence over the past week meant they had accepted the situation with the wages. They had made progress on the church, raising wooden scaffolds to continue building the walls. A church member felled a tree on his farmland, and they had sawed the wood and transported it to the construction site. He and Batabwi had hauled the timber from the pickup one afternoon, while the sun, a brutal force, piloted its rays on their perspiring foreheads and backs, and sawdust specks blew into their eyes. Perhaps the laborers desired more like him, maybe the learning of new trades or skills when construction projects were unavailable. The mission could help the laborers in this way. He would tell Reverend Jim. Zanya reached for the pen and notebook in his trousers. You and this your notebook, Itabwi said, scoffing. What does it say? You they write, make Reverend give them wages to them laborers. Zanya laughed with the men and he put the notebook away. Itabwi, we suppose work, even money they small. Kago said, I know for complaint if them they pay us better money, but this money it no do. Kago, one of the laborers said, since the first day you've been siding with Reverend Jim, anything Reverend Wan do, I could see Kago there first, no be so. I've changed, Kago said. I'm seeing things now. Another man 1 week on the job spoke up. Hey, Zanya, make you go talk to Reverend now. That's why you be a God boss man. See as you tell me, make I come join you in this work, and I agree. Now you wait with the loco. You that have just come, Zanya said, see you asking for more money. The laborers chuckled, and the man was briefly embarrassed. He conceded. No problem, I no stay here for long, but I did see how things they work for here. One of the women who was pounding yam earlier came to collect empty bottles from the table. As she strutted up, Itabwi swiveled in his chair, and his lips curled in lascivious pleasure, appreciating the bounce of her bottom. A laborer next to him said, Batabu, you want fourth wife? Wait till they look now. Man get I. Batabu said, I just admire the work of God. Reverend talk make say we remove our eyes, someone said, if I will cause sin. Batabu laughed, make God come knock me for eye. He turned back to Zanya. You go talk to Reverend about this money matter. See how they work with this my body. If you don't do something, Zanya, this church will never be built. Waiting they talk, Zanya looked around at the other laborers. Some stared at their half-drunk bottles and rolled the bottle caps in their palms. A couple gave him defiant looks and leaned against their chairs, arms folded. You'll stop building the church, Zanya said, catching the drop of coke that almost trickled down his chin. Is that what you're saying? Make you tell Reverend we want more money, Batabu said, staring at him, and he go do am. I dey hear you, Zanya said. Fire boy, Batabu said, raising his bottle. Now God will save you from the fire way day your village. Now you fit handle Reverend. Fire boy, another man called. Fire boy, the men shouted in unison and clinked their bottles to Zanya. Women carried more pounded yam, egusi soup, and pepper soup to the surrounding tables. Music flowed down from the speakers as the laborers' chant rose into the night. Fire boy. The words echoed like a taunt in Zanya's ears as he sipped the dark, sweet liquid and eased himself into the shadows of men. Thank you.
After I stood up, I was worried no one else was going to stand. So our panel today is about publishing across multiple genres, yes? So maybe we should start by just having each panelist talk about the various genres they've worked in. Yeah. Pass it down the line. Afa, would you like to lead us?
Okay. I was just talking. You're listening. So I write short stories, and this is my debut novel that I just read from. And I also write contemporary fiction, and my novel that I just read from is historical fiction. So that's what I tend to dabble in.
So I write short stories, although I haven't in a long time. I like to say I write novels, but I've written one. Right now I'm writing mostly children's books, but I have written plays as well and some nonfiction.
I like to say I'm a fiction writer by trade. I am a novelist, working on a novel right now. Actually, I write short stories, but I published in nonfiction, so articles, and I have a book out that's in nonfiction. So some way, somehow, I kind of like ventured into that genre. And with fiction, is primarily contemporary realist fiction, but I also write speculative fiction.
I guess I should say too, I'm also sort of aspirant in fiction, I guess you could say. I've also published in nonfiction, but I am trying to write a YA fantasy novel. So, yeah, cross genres. Okay, so let's talk about that. We've all sort of dipped our toes into multiple genre pools. What has that been like? Have there been challenges, or how do you juggle multiple projects at the same time, different genres? Thoughts on like the sort of interdisciplinary work that you've been a part of?
Oh, what? Someone else start.
Okay, I'll start. I like to say what I heard Susan Laurie Park say, is that she has like a lazy Susan with all these different projects on it, and I feel like that, because if one thing isn't working, I can move on to another thing, and that's, for me, that's really helpful. So I like to have a lot of pots boiling, if you will, at the same time. Right now, as I said, I'm mostly focusing on children's books, but I have a novel I'm trying to finish, and I did some essays I'm also writing, so.
I take the opposite approach. I typically work on one thing at a time. It takes me quite a while to kind of like centralize all of my attention and my focus on a project. And when that happens, it then takes a while to go through the revision process. And so I find that that for me, I primarily work best when I'm working on one project at a time in one genre at a time. However, I mean, I must also say that when I was writing Historically Black, which is nonfiction, I was working on that project while also revising the novel project that I'm still working on. But I do think, like looking back at that time, that the novel project may have suffered to a certain extent because of my attention being split. So I do think that, yeah, just retrospectively, I probably work best when there's one project in front of me.
I think for me, you asked about crossing genres. I would say going from contemporary fiction to historical fiction was a lot of work. Like, it is a lot of research that you're doing. So for this novel, for example, I was conducting multiple interviews with family members in Nigeria. I was reading 300-page memoirs by missionary families that had been in Nigeria for decades. I was reading research articles because it feels like almost every line you write in historical fiction, you just have to check for fidelity and accuracy to the decade. And so that was something that just demanded a lot of just effort and work. I did archival research as well. I was reading the letters of Vera Thiessen, who was a missionary nurse in the Congo, and she had written letters to her mother and sister in the 40s and 50s, so I was doing that kind of research where I was reading all of those letters. And so with historical fiction, I don't think I'll go back to it. At least right now, I just need space. I need a break from it because it demands so much. This novel took 10 years to write. And I think people are sometimes encouraged by that. Like, I've been on tour and people are like, tell me your lowest point. Tell me how long this took you to write. And so that's been actually encouraging to be able to speak to people in that space. But that's what it demands. That's what historical fiction demands versus contemporary fiction. And as far as working on different projects, I used to be like Alonzo, where I was like one project at a time. But I think, maybe I thought I was like that, like one project at a time, but I would let my short stories gestate for months. Like you'd work on something, maybe write 5 or 10 pages, and then I'd set it aside because I didn't have the ending in mind yet. And then I'd start working on a different story. I think the only thing we have to be careful about, the danger is if we don't finish projects, right? And we just like start something because we're in a space of inspiration. And we need to learn to write without being inspired and face this page without being inspired. Because if you're waiting to be inspired, you will never. Yeah, you meet the page and the inspiration comes to you, but you have to sit at that page. And so that's what you realize. Like, I think there's a danger in letting projects just fall to the wayside because you're not excited by them anymore. I don't think writing is about excitement, it's about commitment. Like I said, yeah.
We're sort of on the verge of another question I'd like to ask, which is what are unique problems you face working in different genres? For the Schadenfreude minded in the audience.
To this point about research, it's interesting, like moving between a speculative project and a nonfiction project, because with my nonfiction project, I had to do a great deal of research as well, but a lot of that research actually goes into the project, like entirely to a certain extent. You have your bibliography and all of the jazz and your index, and so there is a great deal, as aforementioned, of fidelity to the research that you have. But with the speculative fiction project, and speculative fiction is just fiction that's primarily set in a futuristic setting, and so you're speculating on how life would be at a particular time. A lot of the research that I found myself conducting, I'm writing a novel about cyber warfare. So a lot of that research is actually not research that I can drop into the text, because then we call that, what do we call that? When you just drop a whole... info dumping. We call it info dumping, and so there's like, you want to be really careful with how much material you carry into the text, and so I found that navigating that divide from nonfiction to fiction has been tricky, because there's just so much information that you have to leave out. And it's incumbent upon you to know where the line is, to know how much you can give your reader without your reader feeling as though they're overwhelmed and the information is unnecessary. And then you also have to know how much is necessary, you know? So it's a fine balance that I didn't really feel was necessary or is necessary when I am in the nonfiction space.
One of the challenges for me, switching genres, has been going from writing for adults to writing for children. Because, first of all, in terms of a novel compared with a picture book, you know, it's so much shorter, and there needs to be a message in it, but not a heavy-handed message. You know, the child needs to learn something. The child also needs to be the one who solves whatever the dilemma is in the story. And it also has to be illustratable. So I remember a couple of manuscripts back writing something, and my editor was like, you know, you're talking about things that the illustrator is not going to be able to capture. And because I was talking about feelings and things like that, so just trying to go back and make sure, you know, I had things that the illustrator could take and you know, make the story really bloom with their illustrations. That has been challenging, but so enjoyable. It's just I don't know, a different part of the brain that has to work or whatever. But yeah, that's been the most challenging.
And I think to what Tricia said, I would say I had like the opposite, right? Because you went from novel to children's books, and I went from short stories to working on a novel. And I think, I mean, the novel demands, most novels do tend to demand a certain kind of complexity. So there's subplots, like, you know, more characters, like different point of views. There's so many things that you have to think about. And the short story form actually came more naturally to me. And when writing the first novel, I think you have to be gracious with yourself as a writer a lot of times and realize, oh, you've never written a novel before, so you're learning. And I learned some really hard lessons. And I think something Alonzo said about sometimes putting a lot of information in the novel, for example, and not realizing sometimes that that information was for you as a writer. So you might write 30 pages, but those pages are actually for you to understand your character as a writer, not for the reader. Like the reader doesn't need that. The reader might just need a paragraph or even, you know, like a couple of lines of dialogue to understand your character, and realizing that everything you write doesn't have to fit into the novel. And I think that can be a challenge if you're going from the short story form.
Love that. Thank you, guys. So how has your experience with publishing varied across genre?
Here we go.
Who's starting?
Okay. You know, there's a lot to say about publishing, and you know, I'm sure everyone's experience has been different. For me, with my first novel, I was really fortunate. I had a friend who had an agent, and she referred me to her agent. Her agent liked what I was writing. It wasn't even finished, and I was able to get a contract with this unfinished novel. I don't know that happens so much anymore. This was quite some time ago, and so that part was pretty easy. The editorial part was difficult because my editor just was a difficult person to work with. Those stories. And then with the children's book, we got a lot of no's. My first children's book I wrote, and my cousin illustrated. We had pretty much grown up together, and it was really a celebration of our childhood and community in Roxbury, in Massachusetts. And we sent it out, and people were saying, "Oh, it's not really a picture book. It's not really a story. Maybe it's a coffee table book." You know, different things. So we got a lot of no's, and we changed a lot of things in it, and we still got no's. So we were like, "No, let's go back to what we started out with." And then finally, my agent, was a different agent, was able to find a publisher for that. So publishing has been really interesting. Right now, I have a third children's book contract, and I've sent them several different manuscripts that they have not approved. So I'm still trying to find that sweet spot. You know, it always feels like you're starting over again. At least that's my experience.
Okay. I'll start with the nonfiction bit. So I've written, like I said earlier, I published in nonfiction, and the interesting thing for me is that the first major publication I had was in the Atlantic Journal, which is like one of the oldest journals in the country, and it was in the print journal. So that added an extra layer of complication to the entire process. But what a lot of people don't understand behind that is that, I pitched that story a year and a half before it came out, right? I mean, not the story, the article, a year and a half before it came out. And that was a frustrating process because you emailed the editor, and I am also not an agented, right? And so that adds another layer of complexity to it. Typically, your agents sell these thoughts or these ideas and these projects to magazines and to publishers. So I'm unagented, and I email the editor. The editor responds, "We think this is great, yada yada," and then we don't hear anything back for 3 months, right? And you're just sitting there like, "What's going on?" You email them back. They email you some notes. You incorporate the notes. I'm working, right? I'm trying to get this thing out there. Here are your notes, like next week, 3 months. Right, so that's quite a frustrating process that a lot of people don't really know about. That's happening on the back end that you kind of have to go through. But the commonality between that and the book that I published was this sort of major editorial process. So in both of those pieces, there was the moment when the editors came back and said, the entire voice needs to be reworked, right? Can you rework this and then send me another version and use? It's a strange process where, people are probably writers out here, you all probably understand, you produce a draft and it's a good draft, and the edits you receive somehow make the draft worse. And then you get edits again, and then suddenly the draft gets better. But there's this strange back and forth that I found happens often, where there is, one step forward, you just thrown back. And then if you can get back up and try it again, with this publishing industry, then you might have a publishable draft. You might have one that you can sell. But it's a scary process, that whole thing, especially when you don't have an agent, which is a person who advocates for you and who communicates to you the information that's happening in the back that you might not know about.
I like what Alonzo said about just how much time it takes, so I think that's something that's true. Publishing short stories, publishing is rejection. It really is. It's you just need to be resilient and realize that you would be rejected many, many times. It's gotten to the point now that I'll just send stories off to 10 different places, and then the rejections start rolling in, and I'm like, oh, great. And I just swipe. Now I'm used to it, right? But it's been 10 years, and I remember what it felt like the first time I was rejected. It's very dramatic, and you're like, oh my gosh, I worked so hard on this short story. But then you realize, oh, this is what writing is. This is just a part of the process. And with short stories, I submitted to a literary magazine or journal, and they got back to me 2 years later, oh, is the story still available? But if you're doing multiple projects, like we talked about, I had 2 stories actually available, but not the one that was already published elsewhere. So I was able to offer them 2 different stories, and they ended up choosing one of them. And I think that's the benefit of doing different projects. But it really is 9 months, a year, but you just have to kind of develop a thick skin. When it comes to publishing the novel, I think that's just been such a long journey. I think with publishing the novel, it was, I am agented, and so I did have my agent, submitting to publishers. And people always say, you just have to find that one person that's going to accept and take your novel and have the same vision for your novel, and that really is what you're looking for. So, it was a really difficult process, actually. And I think it's difficult because when you're working on something for 10 years, people don't always understand, right? What it's like to kind of chip away at something for years. And so there's another type of thick skin you have to develop to be able to kind of put your head down and keep working at something. But I would say that what I would say about publishing, something I've seen or noticed is that publishers want work that's almost like 95% there. That's what I think. That's like my experience. It's like, you know, I teach about Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird, and how her editor worked with her for 2 years. And so To Kill a Mockingbird, the characters were actually in their 20s when her editor got the manuscript, and her editor told her, no, you actually need to make them 9 years old and 7 years old, or however old they ended up being. And so that was 2 years that she was working side by side with this editor, and I don't think that's something that's happening anymore. Like, what people want is something that feels almost complete by the time it gets to them. So a lot of times you might receive a reject, oh, I love what you're doing with this and this and this. Oh, you need to like work on the structure. And you're thinking, well, that's why you're here, to help me work on the structure. And that's not what you get, because they want it almost complete, almost done. So you really do have, it feels like one shot to make an impression with publishers and editors. But that's like the writer's perspective.
Well, no, from the publishing perspective, I echo that entirely. So when I was at Penguin Random House and we were working on these big Obama and Seth Rogen, we were working on these big projects, you know, a book, it's like takes 9 months from the from acquisition to publication if you're at one of the big presses, and 3 of those 9 months are spent in the editorial cycle. The other 6 months are just other things. Like, the editor is really working on front cover copy, back cover copy, all the other things that happen with the book's publication and printing takes up the editor's time and the writer's time. So this developmental editing phase that we think about, these 2 months with Harper Lee, 2 years, thank you. These 2 years with Harper Lee are years that, you know, I try not to speak in definite terms, but they rarely exist. If you want something like that, you might want to go to an independent press or some type of smaller publishing company that can provide you with the assistance that you need or that you desire. And the other thing I always say is to find an agent who is willing to edit your project. Because that's hard as well, you know. Those agents, because a lot of the really, really phenomenal agents work in publishing, and they love publishing because of what it has become. Editors don't edit, they manage projects. And so these agents wanted to edit, and so now, you know, they have their agencies. And so you can find them, and some of them will work with you to edit your project, so that when it gets to the editor, they can spend 3 months on it and keep it moving. But unfortunately, you do have to have it. I mean, it has to be tight, you know.
I will say though, with my children's books, I had a very hands-on editor. And so we would be on the phone reading parts aloud, of course, you know, it's much shorter than a novel. and going back and forth, and she would send me, you know, pages marked up with red ink. I mean, very old school too, kind of thing. But it was very helpful. Very helpful to go through that process with her. Especially, I had never written a children's book before, so.
It's unfortunate too, because they're good. They're really good, like these editors, and they're frustrated by how little time they have. And so it is a phenomenal resource that is unfortunately, you know, not being utilized.
And I think, like you said, it is something that's passed on to the agents now, because your agent will work with you for a year or 2 years. I have friends who are working with their agents for 2 years to get a manuscript out. But then I have another friend who was querying the agent I have now, and she was like, oh, but that agent told me to go find a developmental editor to, you know, like for my novel. And so I think it really depends who it is, but I do think agents kind of take that role on now with editing your work.
I mean, we often think of writing as kind of like a solitary task, and like I think part of transitioning from being a writer to being published is learning to work with other people. So I guess I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on introducing other people into your process, whether that be an editor or an agent or maybe an illustrator. In your case, Tricia, any thoughts on this?
I was like, I like working alone, but I mean, when it's positive, it's great, right? It's great to have people who are in your corner, people who have the same vision for your project as you do, people who are excited for your project as you are. And I think there is something exciting actually about becoming public facing. And it is different from having kind of just a solitude that you would normally have. But I've found it, maybe I've had more positive experiences than negative experiences when it comes to working with people. But I think that as a writer, what you do learn is that you have to advocate for yourself. So one thing I've been saying lately is like, no one cares. Like I've been trying to tell people like, oh, like no one cares about your work. Like you have to care about your work. And on some level, it's not true. It's like, yes, you have family, you have support, you have community. But on another level, you are the one that's going to be more dedicated to your work than anyone else is. And there are just ways that you have to advocate for yourself with your agent. I mean, even with your publisher. I mean, there are ways that when it came to copy edits of my novel, I had to push back and ask for a different copy editor because I was like, why am I finding things in the manuscript that the copy editor you gave me should be finding? And so about advocating for yourself in these different spaces and advocating for the way you communicate and need to communicate. So I have a friend who she went with an agent who was kind of like, top of the game agent, and she actually didn't have a positive working experience with this person because he never checked in with her. He was busy, he was kind of moving up the ladder, and she felt left behind. And so she went with a lesser known agent, but someone who understands what she's trying to do, has the time to give her the support that she needs and the check-ins that she needs. So my agent is a bit more hands-off, but that's something I actually like. Like I like being left alone to do what I need to do, but you're there if I need you. So it really depends, but I would say you have to advocate for yourself as a writer.
Again, from the publisher's perspective, I think that, and from the writer's perspective, I think that one of the most important things, everything is Affa saying, I agree with, and I would just add that one of the most important things that you remember that, all these people work for you. Honestly, all these people work for you. If they bought your book, they bought your product. And it's your product. If they bought your article idea, it's your article idea. Now, they will try to change it, right? They will try to change it. They'll try to push back, and all of those things are true. And we're in a very tricky position because a lot of us, myself included, just feel so grateful. Imagine having worked on a project for 10 years and somebody says, yes, I want to publish it. Like, you feel grateful. And that gratitude will cloud your head and make you say, oh, no, this is okay. No, it's not. They work for you. It's your project. You can ask them to do whatever it is that you want them to do. The only thing they can say is no. And if they say, you can push them all the way to the edge, because the next thing is that, well, I don't think that this is going to work. No, it will work out. No, don't worry about it. I rescind my request. But from the publishers, and I have been on the receiving end of so many emails. I used to be, where authors would come and make all of these requests and these demands, and the publisher and the editor just says, yes, okay, let's do it. Let's do it. And you can see also, unfortunately, the authors who don't make these demands, who don't get these things. I mean, I'm talking all the way down from marketing to the contract. That stuff, all of that stuff is important, and all of that stuff is information or parts of the process that you can demand more and push back on. So you just got to remember that, you were saying with the agent, the two agents, the agent works for you. You can fire the agent at any time, get you a new agent, God willing, right? You have a lot of power in this industry. The author has a lot of power, and I think that we just kind of forget that a lot.
No, I think that's really true, the whole advocacy piece. I remember with my novel, with Breathing Room, when we were trying to decide on the cover, The publisher kept sending me these covers that I just hated. They were like really bright colors and these big like bulbous letters. And I remember them saying to me, well, we did our research and black women like color. And I'm like, well, this is my book here, and this cover is not working out. You know? So you can say no to things, and so they just kept trying, kept sending things, so they finally sent something that I was like, yes, this is beautiful, you know, this is what I want. Similarly, with my children's book, there was something my editor, I'm trying to remember what it was, there was a scene in the children's book where I think the father was bringing the little girl home from school, and I can't remember the reason now, but the editor wanted the father to leave after that. And I was like, no, that's going to seem like he doesn't live there. To me, it was just important to have this, you know, intact family as a black family in this children's book. And so I had, you know, I had to fight for that. To her, she didn't see what the big deal was, but it was a big deal to me. And so that stayed in there. And then there's other things like that. You have to maybe pick your battles as well. But the things that are really important to you, don't give them up.
I've had a friend, I was talking to her and she was like, oh yeah, you know, I got my contract and, you know, I just signed it and I didn't look over it. Like, you know, she was like, oh, I'm not allowed to like change anything. I'm not allowed to push back. And I was thinking to myself, where is this narrative coming from? Like that authors can't push back. Well, I think it's what Alonzo said. Like if you've been working on something for a while, you think, oh, this is my only chance. Like I can't say no, I can't push back. If I don't like the terms of the contract, I have to sign them anyway. And I mean, that was just very problematic to me. I mean, I think there are resources out there where you have the help that you need to like review a contract and to push back because there are terms that are not favorable to you as an author and that you should speak up. But I thought it was unfortunate that this person didn't feel like they could speak up.
And I'll just say one additional thing. Yes, you only need one yes, right? But I mean, it is kind of hard to say, you know, but if you get a yes, you know, I think that you could, I mean, maybe you'll get another one. Like if you get a yes and you push back and they're just like, no, we're going to stick with these contractual terms and you are not rocking with it, there may be space for you somewhere else. Like there may be space for you somewhere else. Same thing with the agent. You know, I say you can fire your agent. God willing, you get a new one. You know, that's being a bit facetious. But if you had an agent and you let that person go, you were able to get one. You might get one again. Like it's not the end of the road, so we don't have to feel like this is our last shot. You know, I say that because I know it feels that way.
We've touched on this a little bit already, but I think it's an important enough question I'd like to just ask it outright. Are there any trends that you feel you're seeing in the publishing industry that you think new authors should be aware of?
I don't know if this is a trend, but I think it's really important, and I wish I had known when my first book came out that I needed to take over the marketing. You know, there was a marketing person on the team, quote unquote, and a publicity person, but they didn't do a whole lot. And so, you know, I would go somewhere to do a reading and there would be like one person in the room because they didn't do anything beforehand. There was no advertisement about it, you know, no media. And so, you know, eventually I figured out, oh, I'm supposed to be, I need to be on top of this and do something about this. And so, you know, with my other books I did, you know, got right in front of them and did a lot of stuff on my own. And what I have found is the publishers will put a lot of money and work behind an already known entity, but if you're not, then you're just not going to do that. You're going to have to do that yourself. So that's not a trend. That's just the way that it is, I think, in my experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it is like that is what's happening. That publishers used to take on the marketing cost and the publicity cost, and now it's something that's falling on authors. Like they're shifting that over to you, so you are responsible for your tour. You're responsible for where you go. I mean, you're responsible for, again, it goes back to my no one cares statement where I'm saying like you have to advocate for yourself and you have to fight for yourself, but it's the same thing that you are going to have to put the work and the labor into making things happen. I would say one of the trends I've seen is, social media and people getting book deals and agent deals through social media. That's, a big thing that I'm seeing, and people know this, like the size of your following. It's another thing that people are interested in, maybe for particular genres, so they know that, like, okay, there are people that we can sell to as well.
Great, thank you. Another question I feel like we should maybe ask is, what advice would you give new authors who are trying to seek publishing, trying to get published?
I always say, take your time when you're looking for an agent. Know what you want in an agent. There are many different types of agents. Some agents are out there to make that money. And if you want to make money, and you don't really, if money is your number one priority and the longevity of your career isn't a priority, you gotta be honest with yourself. Like, if that isn't really a priority, if creative freedom isn't so much a priority, like you don't mind just focusing on one genre, and you want to like make as much money in that genre as possible, then you want that type. Then that's the type of agent you should look for. If you care about, the longevity of your career, or if you care about maybe exploring and experimenting with different genres and that type of thing, then that's the type of agent you should look for. Be discerning and just be really careful at that stage of the process, because the agent is your number one advocate, your liaison, and that relationship is very important. So I am not agented at this moment, and it's because I have not queried any agents, because I don't want anybody in my head asking me when the draft is coming or giving me advice about what I see in trends in publishing. Have you thought about a romance? I don't want any of that stuff happening, but that's an agent's job. And so you might want to, think about when you want to query agents and the type of agent that you want.
Yeah, I would say yes to all that, and do your research, talk to other writers, get recommendations of agents, people who are really pleased with the agent, and that may be someone you want to, seek out if they're publishing the kind of work that you're writing. Someone once told me to look at books that you think are similar to yours and see if that author thanked their agent and their acknowledgments, because that's probably a good sign. And also I think writers groups are really good, so that you're workshopping your work before you're sending it out. Your work needs to be really tight. You are sending it out, trying to find an agent, querying an agent.
Yeah, I would say finish your manuscript before you also send it out to an agent, because if you send a partial, which is usually what you do, you send like 50 pages or 30 pages, and then they'll ask for a full manuscript if they're interested in representing you. So you want to make sure that you have your manuscript completed, and also make sure you're getting feedback on your work as well. Make sure you're not looking for people who are like, oh, this is great. Like, make sure you're looking for people who are giving you the advice that you need and the feedback that you need, the critique that you need. So yeah, join writers groups and workshops to make sure that your manuscript is where it needs to be before you send it off to agents. Another thing to think about, and this is hard, I feel like there are different views of this, but I queried 5 agents and 3 of them were interested in representing me. But there are some people who would say, oh, you should have queried like 10 agents or 15 agents, right? Just so you'd have more people to choose from. But at the same time, it has happened where people are querying agents and no one's biting. And then, you've maybe, it might be hard to go back to the same agent with like another manuscript. So that's something to kind of keep in mind and think about.
Yeah, this isn't really in the weeds, but my advice is to tier it. So you have your top tier, which may be like 3 or 5, and then the mid tier, and then this really big, like swath of agents at the bottom, and then you move between that because, as Apple was saying, really it's a one-shot game. If they say no, or can you send it to me again? It means no. It means no. Can you work on this and send it back? That's a no. They're getting so many manuscripts in that it's just not feasible.
And I also wouldn't worry about when to send it. I don't know if you guys disagree or differ, but that's a big thing, right? So I've heard that agents get a lot of manuscript maybe around January, because everyone's like, oh, like, I'm gonna finish my book before, by the new year, which is when I sent mine out. My birthday's in January, so it's like, all right, I'm gonna finish by then and send it out, which is what happened. But then I was trying to pick the right time to send it to agents, and people were like, oh, well, don't send it in the summer because no one's really paying attention, but then don't send it in the fall because there are all these festivals. So then I was like, when am I supposed to send it? So that was something that was just really confusing. So at the end of the day, I was like, send it when you're ready, because trying to kind of do this like hopscotch game where you're trying to figure out the perfect time to send something is not always helpful. But that's my experience.
Yes, because if they love it, whenever they get it,
Yeah, they will.
they're gonna let you know they want to do it.
Yeah, that's very important because they're racing. They're racing, and they know that if they don't say yes, somebody else will. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. We're about at our time. Maybe we have some time for some quick audience questions. I don't know if we have a. It's 8:03.
Oh, okay.
Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we pass these around? I'm not the sound guy, but.
Maybe just repeat the question after they say it so that we have it in the mic for everyone.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Gosh, I've been kind of wrestling with the idea of self-publishing, and you hear about hybrid publishing, and then of course traditional publishing. And from everything that you've said, it makes me wonder whether it even makes sense to push for traditional publishing, because if you're going to have to market it yourself, so are there still advantages in trying to go for traditional publisher, or if you can talk a little bit about the pros and cons of those 3 types, or 2 types of publishers?
And just to speak it back, the question is about pros and cons of self-publishing versus traditional publishing or hybrid publishing.
Well, I would say that when I was talking to my husband about publishing and thinking through some questions, he was like, wow, you make it sound really bleak. And I was like, yeah, like, it has felt bleak. So I'm sorry that maybe it feels a little bleak, but I would say it depends on what you want. So there are fellowships and residencies, for example, where if you're interested in certain fellowships and residencies, they want you to be published traditionally, or certain grants, like grant opportunities for writers. So that's part of it. There are people who prefer self-publishing because they feel like they make more money as a self-published author, and they have more control over the entire process. I think it's a lot of labor, and I think it's a lot of work as well. I think traditional publishing does have its benefits, but it really depends on what you as an individual are looking for.
I mean, I know people who have been very successful with self-publishing and also with hybrid publishing. And I know people who, have done that and been able to sell quite well. And then a traditional publisher came to them afterwards because of what they created. I've only had experience with traditional publishing, so I don't know that much about self-publishing other than having heard these anecdotes. But as I said, it's what you want to do. I mean, I knew that because I wanted to teach and stuff, I needed to have, the traditional publishing behind me. So, I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, I also don't have a lot of knowledge about self-publishing. What I can say, though, is, it's going to be a pitch for traditional publishing, is that there's a lot of institutional knowledge that comes with traditional publishing. That's one thing. The other thing is that self-publishing is is self-financing your project, and a lot of people go to go the traditional publishing route because you are financed to do your project. So on one hand, you're financing it on your own while you're also writing and editing and all the other things, preparing the marketing strategy. Whereas with the traditional route, you're paid money to write. So that's, in my mind, the biggest difference. But outside of that, there's all, like I said, the traditional knowledge. I mean, the institutional knowledge that comes with major publishing, and that may be of interest to you. It may not be, but when things like global rights and stuff like that, like can you sell your book to a different country and get rights for that? Like the traditional publishers have in-house people who are just responsible for all of these different things that we typically don't think about. They're outside of the, what we think of as the editor is the primary, traditional book editor. But there's also a managing editor that's solely responsible for the progress of the book, step by step, and all of how it moves through all of the different departments, which you would be responsible for as the self-publisher. So I hear that it's getting easier now, with technology and with some of these platforms that are making it a bit more of a seamless process, but yeah, I can't speak too much about the self-publishing route.
But there is a lot on social media about self-publishing. People tell their stories. YouTube has a lot of, influencers, et cetera, who can talk about that route. And I feel like at the Writer Center, is there a course on self-publishing, Zach?
There is, I think, actually running this weekend.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
But also, if you want to find me, I can give you my card, and I'm happy to discuss. Yeah.
Book coaching, I see a lot of that going on now. Is that like a publisher, like a coach, that kind of, you can approach somebody who does a book coaching. Have you heard of that? And what is that? Have you heard of that? I was at a summit, an online summit, they talk about coaching. It's like a person who will take it's almost like you have a one-on-one with this person who helps you to facilitate your novel or work. And it's a growing business, but I don't think I've ever heard of book coaching.
Yeah, the question is about what do you think about book coaching? Book coaches.
I mean, it's just someone helping you with your manuscript, right?
Yeah. It's
Like a labor coach?
It's like it's the merchant industry. But I guess, maybe it's on the West Coast, because that's where most of them work.
Is the question just what we think about a book coach? Or using a book coach? The question's about using a
Yeah,
book
it's like,
coach?
have you heard of that? It's like a life coach for books.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with that, like the author coach or someone to just help you with your manuscript. To me, it sounds like a developmental editor, like someone who's giving you feedback on your manuscript or,
Right.
I don't know if they're helping you emotionally through the process. I don't know if a book coach also provides that. But that's just what I would think they are, yeah. But I've heard of author coaches and people who, do book coaching.
Probably expensive.
I've done something like that once, and what I must say is that you need, well, maybe it's just me, but you need to be ready for that, because you can get these, I find that sometimes people have these manuscripts and they give it to somebody, like a coach, and they want praise, and so you give them feedback, right, and they think it's a money thing at that point, well, okay, I've done my first session with you. We might need some more sessions. But they think it's a money point. It is not. It's just that this needs more work. And so I would just say that, you seriously got to be ready. Even with if you get an editor, you have to go through multiple rounds. You got to go through developmental edits, then your line edits, then your copy edits. I tell people all the time, you have about 5 more drafts after you sell it. You know what I'm saying? And so you do have to be ready for the work that goes into it.
I have listened to you speak about agents and that, you know, you have power if you have an agent. But these agents, they cost money, don't they? I mean, they work for you for free or?
No, they work for you, but they get a percentage.
Okay.
Okay, so you're not paying any money to them per se up front. You know, when the book sells, they get a percentage.
Okay.
Yeah, they get a cut of, your advance. You get a cut of whatever other rights are sold, like audiobooks, whatever else. Yeah, foreign rights, they get a cut of that.
And there are those people out there who say they're agents and are charging authors before they sell anything. Then those are not the people you want to work with. You don't pay anything to an agent until the agent sells the project. So no, you don't come out of pocket anything. Yeah.
So you guys talked an awful lot about, you talked a lot about having your book tight, having your manuscript tight, because editors no longer really spend the time to kind of look at that. Could you talk about what really makes your draft tight? Like, what are the pieces that make it tight?
Just to repeat it back for the audience, what is it that makes a manuscript tight?
Well, it has to be, you know, your best, what you can do with it. And then a couple of us have mentioned workshopping it, having other people, you know, put an eye on it, who are not just saying, yes, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. They're going to actually tell you what's going on, what it needs, what it's missing, etc. That the Writer Center is here for that. And, you know, you can form your own workshop groups with other writers who you respect and trust. I think that's super important.
I think tight for me means that it's propulsive. It's not a bloated manuscript. So I remember talking to an agent. So I took a novel workshop last semester in Iowa, and I had 400 pages by that point. And I remember my novel workshop instructor telling me to write more. He was like, oh, write like 700 pages and then come back and make it tight and make it like 400 pages, right? But I just kind of went off. I mean, I was like going off with my characters and their point of views. It was wandering at some point, right? But I had like 700 pages and I lost many of those pages. But it was a really difficult process to go from 700 pages to the book is now 336 pages, right? So there were major decisions I had to make. There was like a particular plot point that I was trying to maintain, and then I realized I no longer needed it, so then I lost like 300 pages of that, right? So, I mean, I lost probably 1,000 pages in writing this book over the course of 10 years. So tight to me is that you have a sense of what pages are needed and what's not needed. So it's what I said earlier about writing for the reader and not necessarily for the author. The other thing I would say is, you know, when you get into literary fiction, there's this kind of like, I don't know, like, oh, you can just go on, like, you know, talk about, you know, it's like interiority and like you can talk about this flower for like 3 pages, right? But you need to read some psychological thrillers. Like, you need to read things, read polyphonic novels. If you're someone who's writing, like, I love a large cast, but that was something I struggled with. So I had to go from 10 narrators or 10 point of view characters to 5, right? So there were all of these decisions I had to make to get this novel to that particular place. And it was just a lot of labor and a lot of work. And that's not something you can see for yourself as a writer often. So there's this thing where you have to kind of learn your authorial instinct and like learn to listen to it, but you also need to read things outside of your genre, read things that are going to help you with pacing, with structure, with point of view, with characterization, all of these things. So when I say tight, it's like everything's happening, the novel is moving, it's it's an enjoyable read. I mean, what else? Yeah, like it's not, labored, and it's also not overworked. So I also think that's something that can happen as well.
Yeah.
Can we get in the back with the beer? Sorry.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Can each of you describe what would be a perfect agent for each of you? What are the qualities of a perfect agent?
Yeah, the question is, what would be the qualities of your perfect agent? The latest reality TV show.
One thing off the bat that I'm thinking is that when you're going through this process and you sign with a publisher, things move quick. And the process actually feels opaque to you as a writer. And no one slows down to like explain anything to you. I remember we got a contract for something and my agent's assistant just wrote, was like, we got a contract, do you accept? And I was like, accept what? Like, you know, there's no information, there's no phone call, there's nothing, you're just moving, you know, like you're not the only author that they have. So sometimes I think it would be great if there was some kind of outline, some kind of sheet for like new writers, debut writers, to help them along with the process. And you don't typically get that with agents and publishers who are just, I mean, they're moving along. Like, sure, you're coming out and your book is coming out and you're excited, but they have another book coming out in 2 weeks that they're thinking about, or they're in the midst of like acquisitions. There's just so much that they're thinking about. So maybe it would be someone who took the time to explain things to you as you went through the process.
I mean, I want an agent who adores me. She or he loves everything I put on the paper. I mean, I want us to be simpatico, like we think alike, we read alike. Did you just read that article? I just read that article. But I also want an agent who gives me time and space. So, you know, the book just sold and they're just like, you know, Alonzo, I'll hear from you when I hear from you. You know, I was talking to Afa actually about an agent who I met in Iowa, and she said, you know, you sound like you're working on a really good project. You just take your time. Take your time. You want to make it as good as it can be, and then when you're ready, contact me. And I was like, man, I will contact you. You know, that's probably, and so that means trust and faith. You know, an agent who has trust and faith in me and my work.
Yeah, I want an agent who has a lot of really fabulous clients, but makes me feel like I'm their only one.
That's good.
I don't want to keep us too long because I think we're already running a little late. So maybe we'll take.
I think we have time.
Okay.
Yeah,
we're
we have time, yeah.
Okay. So we'll do back right there.
There's like a few more questions.
Sorry, yes. So I guess this question can be answered from the perspective of like when you were a new writer, or, you know, advice for any new writers here. But, so if you have an agent that says like they are reading your work with interest and then give you this feedback, like do this, do that, it can be things relating to backstory, to structure. You know, like what do you do to, one, I guess, brace yourself in that moment, because it's very exciting being a new writer, having an agent tell you this. But then in terms of like move that along, like do you just, you know, work with this agent? Do you say, okay, well I have this one agent that's interested. Do I now look for other agents to submit my work to? Like what would be your advice during this like early process?
So just to be clear, the question is, how do you respond to agent feedback, and how do you respond to like the first agent who gives you
first
feedback?
agent, new writer, yes.
My first thing, the first thing that comes to my mind is that that is a gift. If an agent hits me back and says, you know, I'm reading this with interest, or your exact language, and here's some feedback, that is a gift. As we talked about earlier, agents are not paid until they sell your book. And so for them to do this work is for them to commit labor to this project without even knowing if they will get it, if they will accept it, or if you will accept them. So that's that. The second thing I would say is that, you know, okay, thank you for your gift. Now, I need to see if I want it. So now I'm reading this to see if it makes sense to me. Does this ring true? And if this feedback does not ring true to me, then you probably can't, unfortunately, you probably can't read you're probably, we call it like being my reader. You're probably not my reader. You don't understand my project. You don't see my project the way I see my project. And so now I'm in that space. I'm probably not going to incorporate that feedback because you're not seeing it how I see it. If you say something and I'm like, man, that hits, like that really rings true to me, then I'm gonna thank them for the feedback and tell them I'm getting to it. And I will not query other agents at this point. I would incorporate that feedback, and then, once I have that feedback incorporated and that draft solid, send it back to them. And then if they say no, I will send that new draft, right, to the next agent. But yeah, I'm gonna take the gift, see if it works for me, and then move forward that way.
Can you talk a little bit about whether you found it difficult to walk in your identity as a writer when you're publishing across different genres? Because I know there can be pressure to niche down, and when you're giving an elevator pitch, you might not be able to say, like, I'm a novelist. You might say, I'm a novelist, I'm a children's, book author, that sort of thing. Is it hard to find that authority and confidence when you might be across many different genres?
Just to repeat back, it's how do you find your identity and settle in an identity when you're writing across different genres? Is there pressure to settle on a single voice, single niche, or how do you find your place?
I think there is.
I was just gonna say the agent that I currently have, knows that I write different things, so that's not really an issue, but maybe for somebody else.
I would say that the agent I have now, well, some agents, are more interested in novels than they are short stories, right? So you might be excited, like, oh, I have a short story collection here, and I do think I have a short story collection, right? But they're focused on the novel, they're focused on what they think sells. And so I think that there can be pressure to focus on that and to try to think of ways to maybe still get your collection out there, but I do think there's pressure to focus on writing novels and like writing your next novel, right? So it's like, oh, this first novel is out and I still have a short story collection, but they're interested in the next novel that you can put out. So I do think there's some pressures around that.
This is a sore spot for me because, I'm a fiction writer. That's what I believe. But I haven't published anything in fiction yet. All of my publishing is in nonfiction. But Google is an amazing thing. So I was Googling myself, and it said at the top, prose writer. I said, yes. That is exactly what I am. It encompasses everything except poetry, because I don't know nothing about poetry. But just prose writer. But no, seriously, I think that you could really kind of lean on just writer, and then let somebody, like if they have a particular interest in something, let them speak that up, and then if you write plays or if you write children's books or something like that, then you can speak to that. But you can kind of like let them lead, and just use that general umbrella term to introduce yourself if you're doing an elevator pitch or something like that. I'm a writer.
Because they just want to be able to sell your work, so whatever it is, yeah.
From the other corner?
I know we were speaking a little bit about trends earlier, so I was just curious how AI has affected the publishing industry and how you all as authors are leveraging it or not leveraging it as a tool in your work.
Thoughts on AI in publishing and also perhaps writing in general?
I did read about this author who won this prestigious award using AI, and that was really troubling to me. I feel as if there'll need to be rules and regulations around, or disclosure around, what percentage, of AI are you using for writing this manuscript. So that was troubling. I don't use it for writing, for writing my novels or writing my short stories.
I don't really have it. I got out of publishing right before AI hit, so I don't have any insider scoop on that. I don't know what they're doing.
All right, thank you. Yes, we can hear.
I guess putting aside rejections and agents and publishing, let's just put that aside for a bit. I'm curious, when you're working on multiple projects, or when you have worked on a project, how do you know when to move on? How do you know when something, because I think in the end you have to listen to your gut, right? Like something's not working. I guess rejection can feed into that process, but like, I'm curious how you guys know when to move on from a short story or a project or a book.
Yeah, so just to repeat again, the question is, how do you know when to move on from something you're working on?
I mean, I feel like the work kind of lets me know if I'm stuck somewhere in a short story. I have a short story I'm working on now. You know, sometimes when I feel like it's not moving, I'm not sure where it needs to go, I'll go to the children's manuscript and work on that. And, you know, if that's not working, I'll go to the novel, work on that for a little while. I like having a lot of different things at once because I don't have to feel stuck in a place, you know, and then I just move around that way, like the lazy Susan that I said before.
I mean, you might end up having just mini funerals for your work and then realize that they resurrect and you come back to them. Because, I mean, that's a hard question, actually, because I had a mini funeral for my novel. I was like, well, maybe it's time to move on. And you read about so many authors kind of going through this. So Marlon James, who won the Mann Booker Prize for A Brief History of Seven Killings, his first novel was rejected almost 80 times by publishers, and he deleted the manuscript from his laptop, deleted it, I think, from his friend's laptop, like threw it away. And then like a few weeks later was like, I gotta find that manuscript again. And like luckily one of his friends had it on his computer. But that's what happened, right? Like he thought, this is done, this is over. So I think it can actually be a hard question to answer. I don't think you always know, but I think like you, at least for me, I keep folders of like, you know, short stories. I'm like, oh, I think I'm done with this short story. I don't think it's going anywhere. But in my mind, I always think, maybe you're not at the level of maturity to be able to handle what this short story might actually be calling for or what this novel might be calling for. And that does happen. Like you're able to, you read more, you study more, you learn more, and then you're actually able to go back to a project that you didn't think that you'd be able to complete. So I think there are times when the story will let you know it's time to go back, but don't be surprised if something calls on you again.
I think another way of looking, Joyce Carol Oates says that the first draft will be stumbling. I don't know the exact quote. It'll be stumbling and crude and all of these terms. And the last draft will be soaring, right? And I was just talking to some students about this, and they were like, I don't know what that last draft is she talking about. But I know it to be true. So another way of looking at it is that you can work on the project until you hit that point where it feels like it's soaring, which is to say, it feels like it's writing itself. You know, there are like moments where you're writing the draft and you just this word doesn't make sense. It should be this word. Everything just falls in effortlessly. It's really hard to explain, but that's what happens. And if you don't get to that point, and if you feel like there is no way that you can get to that point where you are right now and with what you have right now, then it may be time to press pause. I wouldn't say walk away from it, but like I was saying, like just like you know, the 80 rejections and all those things kind of like get us to that point. You could just press pause, walk away, let it just stay, sit in the drawer, all of those terms. And then when you go back with fresh eyes, you might have a way into it that can get you to that point. But I would say, yeah, another way of looking at it is just, you know, have I reached that point yet where it's soaring? And if I haven't, then what can I do? Which sometimes means a complete revision. You know, I might need to just start all over again.
One more? Okay.
My question is about, you know, when you're a new writer looking to get published, it's about knowing the audience. And if you don't, is that
do you really, if you're a new author, do you really have to know who your audience is, who you're writing for? Or do you have to go, research that? Or it's really a matter of putting your work out there and seeing who it resonates with?
I feel like I'm my audience. I really do. I don't try to think about, people out there. I want to write a book that I would want to read. That's it. Now, even writing for children, I want to write a book that I want to read. My mother was a children's librarian, and she gave children's books as gifts to adults all the time. And so now I carry it on for her. And so I'm my audience. That's it.
I think that I like what Tricia said because I think that's true. And if you're worrying about your audience, that's just gonna get into your head and it's gonna affect the creative process and probably stifle the creative process. I mean, in nonfiction, I think you do have to write about your audience in the proposal, but when it comes to fiction, I remember Paul Harding sharing and saying, like, look, you should enjoy this time with your first novel because this is the first time this is the only time you will be alone in your head with your novel, whereas the minute you get an agent, you have someone giving you feedback. The minute you get an editor or publisher, you have someone in your head. So even now, moving on to my next project, you already have someone in your mind, like just these sayings and thoughts of, okay, am I doing the right thing? Am I going the right way? What happened the first time? Like, how do people react to it? So I agree about being your own audience and not necessarily being too much in your mind about that. It's stifling, or it can be.
Yeah, I understand it. Like the truth, that question. But I think the real question is really a craft question. It's not so much about market at all if you're trying to write a good book. It is who is the narrator's audience, which is really different. So I think that if you can think about it that way and not about like who you can sell the book to, that's not what's going to make it a good book. What's going to make it a good book is trying to figure out who is the narrator's audience, be it one person or multiple people. And that is the person the narrator should be speaking to.
All right, thank you guys. Of course, thank you to the Writer Center for hosting us.